In June of last year, 2022, the voters of the city of Santa Cruz had a choice on the June ballot, and that was whether or not to have 6 districts and a directly elected mayor or 7 council districts. And this was in settlement of a lawsuit that was brought against the city that said that the city's at-large elections had the effect of denying certain classes of people a good chance of being elected to the city council. Doesn't really matter whether the city intended that or not. The fact was that that was the allegation made in the litigation, and to settle that litigation, the city, before I was mayor, decided to go to district elections. Which kind of district elections was the question on the ballot in June of 2022. The voters said 6 districts and a directly elected mayor citywide. Folks came to me after the June election and said that they believed that it might be a good idea for the first directly elected mayor of the city of Santa Cruz to be someone who has some experience in government and would know how to work the processes of government in order to effectuate positive change. And that made some sense to me, although I felt that there were many people who fit that definition who would be wonderful mayors of the city of Santa Cruz. And folks said, well, we think it'd be good if you would do that. So after discussions with my wife and people around the community, I decided to go ahead and seek the position of being the city's first directly elected mayor. In the course of the campaign, walking door to door and talking to people in various venues, when I knocked on the door and would say, "Hi, my name is Fred Keeley, I'd love to be your mayor, what's on your mind?" people would immediately say 2 things. Virtually every place I stopped said 2 things: homelessness and affordable housing. The third issue, you'd have to step off a cliff to get to the third issue, which was several issues. Might be climate change, might be public safety, might be economic development, might be a lot of things. But the first 2 out of virtually everybody's mouth: homelessness, affordable housing, what are we going to do about that? Oftentimes they would also say, more in the way of a question, what is the city planning on doing downtown? Because people had heard about the idea that perhaps there would be 15, 17, 20-story buildings downtown as part of a new neighborhood south of Laurel. And it was very clear that when they said that, they were not saying it as if, gee, that's a great thing. The one thing we're missing in Santa Cruz is 15 to 20-story buildings downtown. It was more in the tone of, what the heck is the city thinking about doing that? So that became a people poll of sorts, as I saw it. Talking to a lot of people, right, left, and center, mostly middle to left in our city, but folks in the community, and that was their top of mind set of issues. To me, in a representative democracy, your job is to represent. And so if that's the top 2 or 3 issues for the voters, it's the top 2 or 3 issues for me. It's not, they say, gee, it's homelessness and affordable housing, and I say, you know, those are interesting topics, but what I want to focus on is then some issue they've never mentioned. That's not a representative democracy. So my thought was getting to work on homeless as well as affordable housing, climate change, a couple of other issues, but certainly affordable housing and homelessness. Those were the top 2 issues people mentioned. And there's a reason, because they are vexing public policy challenges. And the circumstances and the nature of those problems have also been evolving over the last several years. So my focus initially here has been on those issues in the context of, for example, south of Laurel development. What are we going to do in that area? The state has assumed a great deal of control over local governments in terms of their land use policies relative to housing. For over 150 years, California was a home rule state, which basically meant that local government made decisions about local land use. The state over the years has chipped away at that, and especially the last 3 years, and specifically in the area of very low, moderate, and above moderate income housing. The state has reached way into local governments at both the city and the county level and has said, we are going to be mandating what you're managing towards in terms of the number of housing units every year. We are going to tell you what the numbers are with regard to very low and low income housing. And by the way, there are going to be very serious consequences for not achieving those at the local level. There will be serious consequences for local government. And that is a 3-year process that has been underway where the state government is moving the authority from Santa Cruz to Sacramento. And we are left with requirements, essentially, from the state. Doesn't really matter whether I like that or don't like that. What matters is that's the condition of the law right now. So in Santa Cruz, we have been told by the state that we need to build about 4,000 new units over the next 8-year period, about. And that much of that needs to be affordable by state definitions. So how is it we do that? The good news is that the electorate also wants to see that done. They want to see more housing for workforce, such as school teachers, police officers, firefighters, anybody else you can think of in the workforce housing, so that people can in fact both live and work in the city of Santa Cruz. With regard to low and very low income, that is the way to provide folks with a rung on the ladder to either home ownership or to be able to save some money, be able to do a range of things so in their life they can have aspirations in terms of housing that are real. So the role of the city of Santa Cruz then comes up, and we'll set that over here for just a second with regard to housing. The other issue that voters talked a great deal about when I was at their door during the campaign is the issue of homelessness. And that issue has evolved and changed over the years. I think in the city of Santa Cruz, up until maybe the last 4 or 5 years, there's been quite a bit of compassion about what to do on that issue. Sadly, the compassion meter, I believe, in the city of Santa Cruz is going down, and going down rather rapidly, because the electorate believes not much, if anything, positive is being done on that issue. When the Ross Camp was in existence at Highways 1 and 9, the public was rightfully very upset about the conditions of that camp. When that camp basically reconstituted itself in the benchlands behind the county building, between the county building and the San Lorenzo River, hundreds and hundreds of people were living in a condition that was not healthy for them, not healthy for the other people that they were with, not healthy for the general community, and not exactly, by the way, it took over an entire city park. So from whichever perspective you want to look at that situation, virtually no one looked at that and said, well, that's the best we can do. That's probably pretty good, and in fact the best we can do. I didn't hear anybody say that. But the issue is compound and complex. I had the opportunity at the request of the mayor several years ago or a few years ago, to head up something called the Council Advisory Committee on Homelessness. I was the convener of that, which meant I was the presiding officer without a vote. The city council appointed folks to it, both folks who were housed and folks who weren't housed, people in small businesses, people from neighborhoods, all kinds of walks and backgrounds. And a couple of things came out of that that I think were quite good. One was, and I think this is perhaps the most important takeaway from the catch for me, and that is when we're working on this issue of homelessness, it's not about status, it's about behavior. It's not about whether someone's homeless or not homeless. It's about what's the behavior going on there. So let's get into an example. If someone is possessing, selling fentanyl, it's not directly relevant whether that person is housed or unhoused. They're engaged in very serious public health and safety activity that can go horribly wrong, and people can die, and people can have serious long-lasting effects. To me, it's not about their status as someone selling drugs, not as their status of whether they're housed or not. It's that they're selling fentanyl in our community. If someone is experiencing mental illness and it is debilitating to them, it's not relevant to me whether they're housed or unhoused. They're experiencing very difficult, life-destroying experiences every day in their life, and they need help. So the issue here for me is not status with regard to homeless folks, it's behavior. How can we assist those that want help, are ready to accept help? And that help could come in a variety of ways. It may be mental health services, it may be food, it may be healthcare services, it may be shelter, it may be all those things, a combination of those things, or some other things. And that is a population of folks who are really only able to receive that kind of help when they're ready. I was talking to someone the other day who knows a lot about this subject, who has read a lot on this in terms of thoughtful analytical work, which says that the experience of providers of mental health and healthcare services who interact with the homeless population, that it is oftentimes the case that someone will need to be contacted 3 or 4 dozen times before that person is ready to accept help. Some much less frequent, some somewhat longer. But it is not at all unusual for folks working in the homeless community on services that someone needs to be contacted dozens of times before they feel ready to do that, to receive that help. That complicates the issue, certainly. A second issue that has arisen fairly recently by way of state action is that the state of California is now requiring every county in California to have a CARES court. Santa Cruz is in the second group of that, which means Santa Cruz County will have to do that in 2024. About half the counties in 2023, about half the counties in 2024. Santa Cruz County is in the 2024 tranche of counties. That is going to be more than a minor change in how folks experiencing homelessness are worked with. Here's why. I think a way to look at this is that it is a state way of looking at what we have called in the past conservatorships, where someone is unable to care for themselves. There's a determination made by professionals and by a court that the person is simply unable to make life choices any longer because of, now fill in the blank, because of extensive drug and alcohol use, because of mental illness, because a whole range of issues may come into play here. That's not without controversy. That will be very controversial. It was controversial when the legislation was moving its way through in Sacramento. Some folks objected to it. They felt that it was taking people's rights away to make decisions about their life in a way that was similar to how things were back when the state ran state mental hospitals that were in many cases very terrible places for people to be. There's been 50 years of advancement in how to deal and work with folks experiencing a wide range of challenges in their life. Conservatorships oftentimes work out quite well for folks. Now the effort is to shift that to a broader lens that includes folks experiencing homelessness. This will be very controversial in the city of Santa Cruz and the county of Santa Cruz, but it's coming. So the role of the city, it seems to me, in dealing with homeless and folks experiencing homelessness has a couple of parts. One is delivery of sufficient services to be able to truly help folks experiencing homelessness. That's the role of county governments in California. They have a county Department of Health. They have a county Department of Mental Health. They have a county Medi-Cal system. They have a county food stamp system. All of the service-oriented issues reside in county governments in California. Cities, you can walk around here at City Hall. We're sitting in my office in City Hall. You can walk around City Hall all day and you will never find a city Department of Health or a city Department of Mental Health. That's what counties do, not cities. Cities build things. That's what we can do and be good at it and do our part. So with regard to homeless, what are the parts that can be helpful? Shelter, navigation center, permanent supportive housing. Those are the three that when I'm in discussions anyway with folks experiencing homelessness, folks who provide services therefore, broader members of the community, I hear that if the city built those three pieces, that would be the city doing something quite substantial and quite helpful. So that then county government, standing in the shoes of the state and federal government, can pour services into those brick and mortar facilities. So one of the things I'm trying to do is manage towards placing a bond measure on the Santa Cruz city ballot sometime in 2024 that would have that piece for homeless. There'll be another component part, and that goes to the issue of affordable housing. So the city of Santa Cruz has a very large number of affordable housing units. It is required by law to plan for and do more than just planning. Make sure that it comes online, not just submitting a planning document and then not doing anything about it. So it's my thought that this is another area where a bond measure could be quite helpful. When working with nonprofit housing developers, who are gifts from heaven as far as I'm concerned, these people do great, great work, whether it's Mid-Penn Housing or any of the other nonprofit housing folks around, they do very, very good work. They will tell you that after they have cobbled everything together they can, tax credits, density bonuses, all kinds of other stuff, they're somewhere between $100,000 and $250,000 out from being to pencil out one unit. Low-income housing does not mean low-cost housing. The housing costs the same. It's really who gets to occupy the house or the apartment or whatever it might be. So how to close that gap of $100,000 to $250,000 a unit is critical. to hitting the state number that Santa Cruz was given in the very low and low-income housing numbers. I see a bond that has two pieces in 2024. The brick and mortar side of homeless within the city of Santa Cruz, and over here, funding not for every affordable unit, but to make enough units come online that the city can hit the number, together with both for-profit and nonprofit developers. So that's how I see those issues. Now, let me hasten to add, that doesn't mean the city does nothing else on either of these issues. The city has plenty of activities it's engaged in. The city, for example, has a homeless response coordinator. The city goes out with outreach workers to reach out to the homeless community and connect folks who are ready and willing to accept the help, connect them to the kind of help they need. City also has folks who go out and clean up areas that folks experiencing homelessness are not keeping up as much as we wish that it might. And when you get into areas such as the Poganip and Sycamore Grove up Highway 9, those are also near water intakes for the city, and so there's a public health and safety set of issues there as well. So the city does a number of things, but in terms of making real progress on the issue, helping folks move out of homelessness into another situation in their life that's better for them and better for the general community, I see the bond as being a key element of that.
There's another component to this, in that, and you probably know the numbers better than I do, is that the homeless population in the county, or the city, let's talk about the city, has just skyrocketed in the last few years. And I'm sure that creates issues with this disproportionate amount of people versus the funds that were allocated to perhaps an estimate that was 10 years, 5-10 years prior to the reality of the situation on the ground. I'm wondering how the county is able to reconcile that with the state, saying, listen, we're dealing with an inordinate population here, but with a basic, flat amount of resources all these years. I mean, I can't imagine that the response has been that overwhelming to the population growth. I would imagine that the funds for homeless have pretty much stayed the same while the population has increased. So are there able to be reflexive policies that are being recognized as, things that are related to the population problem as well as just the logistical problem of homeless in general?
Each year, the city and the county and volunteers and so on engage in what's called the point-in-time count for folks experiencing homelessness. It is admittedly inaccurate. Nobody pretends this is accurate down to within a margin of 10 or 20 people. Nobody pretends that's what it is. But they do pretend, and I think correctly, that this is the best data we have. Maybe if you engaged in it more comprehensively or whatever it might be, maybe you get the number refined. But the number is the number that we have. It's about 3,000 countywide and about 1,500 in the city of Santa Cruz. That's roughly. That number stayed more or less constant the last few years. I think what we've seen are two things. One is, where are folks who are experiencing homelessness? Where are they? Where are they camping or sleeping, whatever it might be? That's been changing. We saw Ross Camp, we saw the Benchlands. Now you see much less of that, because now many of the folks experiencing homelessness are living in the Poganip or Sycamore Grove, which is much less observable than either the Ross Camp at Highway 1 and 9 or the Benchlands Camp between the county building and the San Lorenzo River. Both very, very, very public spaces with hundreds of people in them. So I think that the appearance goes up and down in terms of the number of homeless people. But generally speaking, within some tolerance level, it's about the same number for the last several years. That raises questions, because if you took the entirety of folks experiencing homelessness in Santa Cruz, the city of, let's call that 1,500 people, when the benchlands was cleared in sections in 2022, about 50, 60 people at a time, how that was accomplished was that the city and the county provided teams who went in and met with every single person multiple times, asking them, we're going to be closing this part of the benchlands. We've got a place for you to go. Would you like to go to River Street? Would you like to go to Coral Street? Would you like to go to the Armory? Would you like to go to the Lookout campground adjacent to the Armory? About 20% said, yes, I do. About 80% said, no, I don't, or weren't clearly communicating with folks what they wanted to do or not do, simply staying out of that process. So if 20% are willing in that particular examination to accept assistance, so 20% of 1,500, there's 300 people who say, yes, that can work for me. Now we go back to a very large number of people who may need repeated contact before they start trusting the system or wanting to be in the system in any way. I have no idea what that number is. None idea. Even putting a number out there would be a disservice, because I have no information that would tell me how long that would take. The only even roughly approximated data would be that which I've heard from the professionals in the field, who say sometimes 3-4 dozen contacts need to happen before someone is ready to accept help. Then let's go to the other end of the spectrum, which is folks that will find themselves in the CARES court world that comes online in 2024, operated by the county, not the city. What's that experience going to look like? Is that another 20% of the population of folks experiencing homeless? Is it 10%? Is it 30%? I have no idea. I don't think anybody can say anything even close to a right number. I think it has to come up, be operationalized, and then see what the numbers are. But let's assume, for sake of discussion even, that there's another 20%. So now we're at 40%, where folks who've said, yes, I'm ready, and folks who are so incapacitated that it's appropriate for them to be essentially conserved in some way, shape, or form. So now you have 40% of the 1,500 that there's something that can be done. Now you got 60% left. The question is, what is going on with that 60%? Now my guess is that they are going to be a compound, complex group of folks, just like any group of folks are, whether it's mayors or filmmakers or anything else. We all come in different size, shapes, and ways that we view the world and live our lives. I think that's going to be the big challenge, is what happens then. Let's say we pass the bond measure. We have shelter. People are willing to go into it. Navigation center, they want services to help with their life, and permanent supportive housing, because they've done the first two. They do want to stay with this new way that they're living, and it's making better sense to them. and there's folks who are conserved. I think it will be perceptibly different in the city, but we are still going to be left with a challenge. How much of that is in the purview of mental health and homeless services versus how much of that is in the purview of law enforcement? Because again, this is not about status, it's about behavior. So I'm thinking that at this point, I can see some real measurable progress by passing a bond measure that allows the city to have the funds for shelter, navigation center, permanent supportive housing. And I see potentially CARES courts having a positive role in this as well. If we got that done in the next 2 years, I think that residents of the city, including homeless folks, visitors to our city, it would be noticeably different in terms of a reduction in folks experiencing homelessness because we're providing something that will work for them. The bigger issue is what happens after that 2 years. And that's also what I'm interested in, trying to find solutions to that population, which will be enormously difficult to do. But if we go about it by dealing with behavior rather than status, I think we've got a shot at it.
You know, that's definitely the compassionate way to be, you know, is to assess somebody as to how their behavior reflects on their potential for, you know, being reintegrated into society and categorized. You know, if they are able to conduct themselves, you know, with a sense of being lucid and responsible, then, you know, I think we have an answer to the problem. You know, there are other people who, they don't want to live in a homeless shelter. They don't want any drug and alcohol or substance abuse counseling. They want to be part of the party. And now you have Santa Cruz, which has put itself on the map as just being a big party zone where you can get any drug, and the liberals don't mind you know, camping on Main Street and all that. Of course, conservatives and business owners and things like that are, you know, really up in arms. And yet at the same time, you have a city that's dealing with, you know, a population crush. I mean, the population may have topped off, you know, the last few years, but for a while it was just growing exponentially, it seemed like every year. And now we're kind of saturated. You know, we just have homeless encampments here, there, and, you know, downtown is saturated, and, you know, there's a lot of, it's a menace to a lot of people.
Well, let me say a couple of things on that. One is, for me anyway, I'm an unapologetic liberal Democrat. I'm 72 years old. I've held 4 elective offices. I'm the same liberal Democrat I was when I got elected to the Board of Supervisors in 1988 as I am the mayor of Santa Cruz in 2023. Having said that, I don't think that this issue around responding to folks experiencing homelessness, I don't think it necessarily cuts liberal, conservative, right, left, middle. I don't think it cuts that way. I think instead that we have a community which has mixed feelings about those experiencing homelessness. And where the common ground is, I believe, is we are still a compassionate community, but not a community that wants to be played for fools. And so when addressing homelessness, it is critically important from my point of view that, again, this is about behavior, not status. I won't vote for an ordinance or a law that criminalizes homelessness. It makes no sense because it raises the question of, so what? Then what are you going to do? Put homeless people in jail for being homeless? Take away everything they have because they're homeless? No. No such law could withstand a constitutional test. So it has to be about behavior. Now, my guess is, if you live in a neighborhood, you're very concerned. I live in a neighborhood, I'm concerned, my neighbors are concerned, folks that are experiencing homelessness, some of whom are sweet and kind and vulnerable, and their life is very challenging, but they're not behaving in a way that causes some downside to the folks in the neighborhood. There are other folks who are experiencing homelessness, just like there are folks who are housed, who cause all kinds of problems in neighborhoods. And neighbors correctly want to see something done about that, in the same way as if they had a next door neighbor who was engaged in behaviors that were untoward and illegal. They would expect something done about that as well. If you're a business owner downtown, irrespective of where you fall on the political spectrum, you want a downtown that is welcoming to our residents and to our visitors. That doesn't mean that there's never a homeless person downtown. There's no rousting that should go on. But there are behaviors that also are not acceptable. It's not acceptable for a business person, for someone, whether they're housed or not housed, to all of a sudden bring possessions and set it outside the business and engage in behavior that turns potential customers and clients away. It doesn't matter who you are. That's not right and proper. So I don't think this cuts right-left, Republican-Democrat, liberal-conservative. I think it cuts in a way where people say there's behavior that's acceptable and there's behavior that's unacceptable, no matter who is doing it. I don't care if you just breezed into town in your Ferrari. Don't be throwing crap around our town. Don't be changing your oil on a curbside. Don't be selling drugs out of your Ferrari. It doesn't matter to me whether you're housed or not housed. This is about behavior, not status. I think if we keep our eyes on that, we can fashion ways that are not criminalizing homelessness. It's about behavior, not status. That's critically important. That was what the Council Advisory Committee on Homelessness used as its lodestar. Every example that was brought up, every solution that was examined, the final report was all about behavior, not about status. The degree to which it was about status was the degree to which it was about finding solutions on an individual basis. Does that person need drug and alcohol accounts? Do they need mental health housing? Do they need housing? Do they need shelter? Do they need food? Do they need to be enrolled in Medi-Cal? It's all about that, and not about their status. It's about their behavior.
Mm-hmm.